So I just want to thank everyone for coming out this afternoon, this kind of steamy day. But I'm Steven, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm a local hairdresser. And this is Bonnie Winfield, and she's a retired professor at Lafayette College. And we're just going to speak about our journeys of our past, our healing, and how we've helped other people in our communities achieve better lives and also better ourselves. So let me introduce Bonnie to everyone. Bonnie, come on up.
Okay, I have some notes, but mostly it's going to be from the slides. So this is Dr. Bonnie's journey home. We took this, these two things, to healing, to happiness, to joy, from a podcast, or was it something that someone wrote about us? And in the headlines, that's what she wrote. So we decided to steal it, and it's actually on my window if you've been to my studio. All right, what do I do here? That. Okay, the journey home. In 2007, Amy Osborne, a local person in Easton, invited me to be her social work internship supervisor through Monmouth University. The internship would be in the local county jail. I said yes, and we walked through the gate. That began the journey home. But the story really begins 10 years and more before, as I walked across a bridge in Binghamton. At that time, I was in what St. John the Cross calls the dark night of my soul. On that bridge, I looked into the rapid flowing water. In 1996, I lived in Tully, New York. I was living the dream. 15 years before, I had been to Nicaragua and made a promise to this guy in Nicaragua who ran a clinic that I would help his people. I asked him how I could help his people. And he said, you go back to your country and you teach your people about what they are doing in the world. And in those mountains, right near Honduras, I said yes. And then I came back to Syracuse. I lived in Syracuse then. And I was like, oh my goodness, how am I gonna do this? I had only been to college for 1 year, but I decided I was gonna be a professor. And if I could become a professor, I could teach the students. So I became a professor. I got my PhD. I then moved to Tully and I owned this really cool cottage that was part of the Chautauqua Institute many years before. It was on a lake, and I could go on the lake on my canoe. And I went traveling everywhere. I went to Turkey, I went to Budapest, I went to Japan, I went to China. It was living the dream. There's my doctorate degree. There's my announcement that I'm an assistant professor in all the publications. I did it, and I became a professor, and I started teaching the students. I incorporated civic engagement in every single class. It was all working. It was beautiful. I would drive from Tully to Binghamton, and when I came home, I could look at the stars because there were no lights around the cottage, and I could see the moon, and you know how much I love the moon, and the stars, and it was beautiful. And then it all fell apart. In 1 year, the dark night in my soul came and took me over. I had 4 family deaths. First my father, then my brother, then my mother, and then my kid's dad, all in 1 year. The partner that I had for 11 years, we owned the house in Tully, decided he didn't want to be with me anymore. It was horrendous. Things happened that Every time, like all the time I was growing up, I was called the little professor because I learned how to live in my head. I learned how to deal with things that way because there were so many scary things happening to me. So I became this little professor, and all of that stuff was in my head or somewhere else. I felt like I was never afraid. I was never angry. Little did I know it was all inside. I went to South Africa. I went on an academic conference. And first I went to Johannesburg, and I had an appointment to meet with a pastor of a church on Jeppe Street. I got there too early. So they said, look, you could go out and go down the street. There's a great museum you can see. Okay, so I'm walking down Jeppe Street, and Jeppe Street was very friendly. They had people like the ambassadors that were walking around, and everything felt safe. But I was never afraid. So when I walked into a store and I changed some traveling checks for dollars, or whatever they are there, rupees or something, I never noticed the guy who looked at me, but I noticed him later. So I walked out down Jeppe Street, the walking street, where all the ambassadors are, and I turned to go to the museum, and there was a busy street, all kinds of cars and people, and there was the guy. I caught his eyes, and he was motioning to a guy behind me, and then he took out a knife, and they grabbed me, and I went away. I fell on the ground, and I just totally passed out. I woke up, and people were all around me. And this woman, a black woman, came to me and she said, come with me, honey. I'm black. I can take care of you. And she walked me out of the crowd. Took me to actually the post office where I could use the bathroom. And she was telling someone that I fainted. I'm like, no, I was mugged. I had a passport wallet around my neck and inside, like behind a fanny pack. They cut it off, it was gone. But I never felt the fear. All of this was happening, and I never felt fear because I did not feel. When I was little, it wasn't safe to be me. I liked to pretend I was a boy. I didn't want to be a boy, but I knew if I was a boy in my house, I would feel safe. And so from that moment on, I would go up in the tree. I would go out in the woods. I would go anywhere so that I could feel safe and not feel fear. I sat by the river and wept. A moon peeks from behind a cloud. Shadows dance across the sparkling water. Images flow through my mind. Water over rocks and stones. Emotions evaporate into the air. The mist from the waterfall brush across my face, as if painting a canvas. A river's water flowed to the sea. Such a brief moment in time. So I had to find a new way. I sat by that river. Binghamton has two rivers like here. It's a confluence. And I stood on the bridge, just like that. I stood on the bridge and the water looked inviting. But you know what? I saw that. Like I did that on campus. But I saw that. I saw a blues woman playing the piano in the sky. And I said, I need a new way. Because in that year before, I kept building my brick walls, a desk, build the brick wall back up, build the brick wall back up, but it just kept tumbling down. Just like if you're in a land where earthquakes If they keep happening, there's nothing left. So I had to find a new way. I began playing the blues. I was a classical pianist. I started playing the piano when I was 8 years old. I lived in this small little town, and so I got to go to the Mrs. Ide's house after school. I skipped going on the bus. I went to her house and said, "Can I take piano lessons?" She goes, "Sure, but does your mother know you're here?" It was a little town. There was only like 100 people. But my mother was overjoyed because she was a musician. So I started playing the piano, and I was good at it. But I always used music. I could memorize it, but I always played the controlled classical music until this day in Binghamton, when I realized there was something else. I started to paint the painting. I started writing stories. I started drumming the heartbeats. And I started creating community. I had a dream. I used to paint my dreams. So if I had a dream, I'd wake up and I'd paint it. And this was my dream. I'm drumming. I'm going to the mountains. I'm writing. I'm making art. And I'm being with people. And I started doing something else in Binghamton, New York. I looked for the red bird. I knew that the red bird would save me. And I wrote a poem. I want to be reborn. My masculine and feminine selves are mating. A new creation is being brought forth. The dark moon in Gemini is the new beginning. My soul, my sun, my moon, my stars are being born in the shape of a great red bird. A bird with wings to fly, with red color to be visible, with the eyes of an eagle to see, with the wings of a hawk to soar, with the wisdom of an owl to just be. My inner and outer selves will unite. My masculine and feminine will be connected. My shadow will dance in the sun and drum in the light of the full moon. The phoenix will rise in the ashes of my old self. I wrote this poem in Binghamton when I was looking out the window. One white feather. Just a note, I never wrote poetry before this time. Before seeing that blue scene, everything changed. She sits on the window seat, looking out the Washington Street Bridge. The lights seem like crystals in the dark night of her soul. Her toes curl into the softness of the velvet cushion. Her hand touches the cold glass of the window pane. As she sips her wine, she knows what she must do. The decision has been made. Exactly when, she does not know. Perhaps tonight, during a conversation with a lover, or maybe last week during a sad and lonely sleepless night. Endings are just beginnings, many say. Even so, the pain is not less, the sorrow less deep, the loneliness less real. One white feather drifts down to the darkness of the green grass below, twisting as it falls, ever so lightly, floating slowly with it until it lands softly on the dew-covered blades of grass. The struggle is over. Questions of right and wrong, guilt and passion. Will the peace come? Will the ease of conscience calm the restless, lonely nights? One white feather used as a pen, dipped into the ink the color of deep red. She sits on the windowsill and writes the words of goodbye before she herself falls, twisting and turning into the darkness of loneliness and fear. And like the one white feather, she and then softly on the dew-covered blades of grass, resting peacefully until the dawning of a new day. I met a woman when I lived in Binghamton. I moved to Binghamton. I met a woman, Juanita. Juanita was a therapist. And so I went to her for therapy. One of the sessions, she did a meditation. And in the meditation, I was in a tree. It's where I used to go as a child. I would go in the tree, find safety. She ended the meditation because our time was up, but I wasn't quite out of that sense. And we split, right? I went home, but I didn't go home. I went to the nearest shopping mall, and I went to Cinnabon, and I bought the biggest Cinnabon. And at the time, I was very conscious of what I was eating. I was thin, and I have this big Cinnabon. I'm like, what am I doing? I tried to call her, and she didn't answer. She was gone. That night, I had a dream of what happened to me as a child. And I knew I needed to do something about this. I needed to take care of that trauma. And in my trauma, what I did is I escaped. Right? There's fight, flight, freeze. I used to flight. I would fly. And I never, ever dealt with it until this time. I had the opportunity to open a studio. I had to move from one of the places that I lived, and a woman who owned a building, almost like the building I live in now, she said, come and move into my building. The apartment's gonna be available. And at the time I had a baby grand piano, I have 2,000 books. How am I gonna do this? She goes, well, right down the street, there's a studio, and that studio is coming up for rent. I said, okay, so I checked it out, and I got the studio. And this is the studio. Hardly see it. It's called Embracing the Soul. Embracing the Soul was based on another dream. You can see we did drum circles. And this is the basement of the building. So we made a studio in the basement, and upstairs was a gallery where I had the baby grand piano. And we had concerts. And you can see, just barely, in the back, I can point to it, is the red bird. I made the red bird, but somewhere in my travels I lost it. That's the inside. So I had this studio, people came to it, I did expressive arts therapy. I learned from Sean McNiff, who is the guru of expressive arts therapy. He really encouraged me to go forward with what I was doing. I went to workshops, we did drum circles. I really found and healed what was happening in me. And then I moved to Easton, and we went to the jail. So at Easton, I worked at Lafayette College, and I was the director of community engagement. And so I met lots of people, people who are here, and it really became part of the community. Had a studio right around the corner. Barry Evans, who worked at Lafayette College, thought I should have a studio, so he arranged for me to have the studio, and we started, it's hard to see, we did art therapy there and other things. And we started the prison arts program, because I knew that what had happened to me, I wanted to have a space that the healing could happen to others. And I wanted to witness that experience for them. Lafayette students would come in with me, and they would, at the end of the semester, make art based on the stories I told them. This is Patricia. The first time I went into the jail, someone told me about Patricia, who was 16. She She was behind the door. She could only see me through that little thing that they had opened. Because they wouldn't allow her, because she was only 16, to be with the rest of the women. So she had to stay in her cell. Tears were coming down her eyes. She had been in a juvenile facility somewhere north of here, which ended up to be not a good place, we learned eventually. Anyway, she had threatened someone with a knife, with a pen, and they decided she needed to go to jail. So that was the first person I met. This is Lafayette students reading stories to the Lafayette community. So the first time I went in with Amy, we decided to do an assessment of what was happening inside. And the women told me their stories. And it was all stories of trauma, of abuse, of drug addictions, mostly having to deal with their partners. And I decided I was going to stay there and keep going there, and started going in every week. So this is a lot of people have heard these stories because these things are hanging in my studio now. But it was all because of that experience that I had, where I learned what had happened to me as a child, and then learned that I was always in my head with that trauma, that I needed to learn a different way. And I wanted to show people, show women especially, a different way. Healing through art, through music, through drawing, through community. So we made this quilt. So when I was on 2nd Street, North 2nd Street, we had 2 rooms. In one room we would do writing, in the other room we would make art. So in the room with the writing, I had the women write a story about when they felt empowered. And then we went into the art side, and we made squares based on a word. You can see it more in the next picture. In their story. It's upside down because when I turned it around, it didn't look right because the picture was taken this way. And then they made quilt squares, and the women, 3 or 4 women, worked on each square. And that was the whole thing about what I do, is people work together. They work together to make their journal entries. Sometimes we pass the books around whenever we make art. These are all just pictures that come from that. All the work that they've done. So this is a book. The healing was unbelievable because the stories were unbelievable. One day I went in, it was going on a Friday, and the women came to me and they said, one of the women really needs to talk tonight. So that night was when we would do a circle, and I'd have people write. We wouldn't really have talking back and forth. She really needs to talk about what's happening. I'm like, okay. So she came in and she told us the story of how that afternoon, the jail, I don't know if they still do, they used to bring high school students for a tour. I guess it was those scared straight things. They didn't check to see if the children there, if their mothers were in the jail. So they bring them in, and this woman didn't know if her son was going to be there or for his friends, so she hid in her cell. They came and they toured, and they take them right on the unit. That night she came and told us the story. Then I had each woman write their stories about what it was like to be a mother in jail. They made this mural, which I've actually donated to someone else. It's a big, it's as big as that screen. And I had the women express themselves on the canvas. And what we do first, and anyone who's been to my studio knows we do this, we take a baby wipe, and actually started using the baby wipes because the prison wouldn't let me bring in paintbrushes, so I had to find another way. And so they would choose colors and they would put it on the canvas. It was unbelievable. They all sat there putting these colors on. You could feel something happening. Then they all stood up at the same time and looked. I was like, whoa, this hasn't happened before. They're like, we feel like we're healing. It was unbelievable. I took the canvas home and then I brought it back the next week and they put images on it. Can't really see it too much. They put images on it. And then we called it Through a Mother's Eyes. These are their stories. This is, each one of them wrote a story and I published it in this book. If you want this book, you can purchase it from me. I'm sorry I don't have it through Book and Puppet. I guess we could do that. I'll pass it around, you can see it. So there's this mini story. Oh, this little girl, I had to put her up there because she actually came to this studio on 2nd Street as a little kid, like little like that, right? And so what happened is the women used to be able to come through work release. They would come out and come to my studio. And one time, I don't know if it was the Lafayette students or the women, they said, we want to have something for the kids. Can we just bring our kids? So I thought it was going to be like 3 or 4 kids. Well, it ended up to be like 10 little kids. I'm like, okay, Lafayette students, you have to do something. And they painted flowers all along the walls. She was one of them. 8, maybe 6 years later, I'm walking out of the jail. A woman is coming in with her little girl, but she is now a teenager. They walk past me, and the little girl says, Mommy, that's Dr. Bonnie. I was like, what? Don't you remember? We went there and we painted flowers on the wall. And she remembered, and that was her. We did art shows, we did one at St. John's. These are all the words of the women. This one is really cool. So I know that it was really hard for me just to keep this whole thing about myself, but I really wanted you to see how what I had gone through was the experience of a lot of these women. But luckily, I lived in a place that I could thrive, even with that. So this woman, she came into, she was in the jail and her cellmate was trying to convince her to come to my programs. So finally she gave in, Lisa, and came and started painting. And she was an amazing artist. And then one day she did this series of these guys, gals, who escaped from the jail. And she made these cartoons. And this even looks like one of the correctional officers. And she thought, the correctional officer thought it was pretty funny. So these are actually large size, but I also made these into a little book, but I couldn't find them right now, but they are also, look at those. She was released. She lived in the single room occupancy up on 5th in Northampton, and she passed away. So she's no longer with us. These are portraits that the women did. If you can read that QR code, that will take you to YouTube space where I have the portraits and the women's words. This is a mural we painted, so it was really fun when I kind of pushed the envelope all the time going into the jail, and I got to go in with a canvas, so this is like that big, rolled on my shoulder, and a wooden crate filled with paint, and paintbrushes actually, and we made this mural. And the mural represents, each woman did a little square that represented their life. painted it on the mural. You can't see them too well, but right here are two purple feet. And there was a woman who was handicapped who was actually in a wheelchair. And she wanted to put her feet on the mural. And so the women took the canvas, put it on the floor, put paint on the bottom of her feet. I had these little sponge rollers, and helped her do that. Then they went and got a trash can, filled it with soapy water, and washed her feet. It was beautiful. The little angel, there was a woman who always wanted to come but didn't. She would just stand and watch. I'm like, come on, you want to do something? She's like, oh no. So one of the women says, so, what would you want to put on here if you could? And she said, an angel. Oh, wait, I'll make an angel, and then you can paint it. And she did. And that's what happened there. They learned how to work together. This is another mural they painted. So this is what we do now. We have artist healing process, I do workshops, we have drum circles, we do all kinds of art there. Some of the women still come. On 3 different occasions, a different woman who I worked with since, like all the time they were in jail, out of jail, are now workers at a treatment facility. And they brought their team, their group of women, to my studio. And we did the same thing that we did inside the jail, but it was really, really beautiful. So it's all about hope. This was a circle we did, and we started a program called Hope, and this is just like my last scene story of today. Because it's all about legacy. It's my legacy for here in Easton. It's my legacy to my 2 granddaughters. This is a portrait that my granddaughter made of me and her. It ends up in the back of a journal that I was working on. And it's where life stories live on. So I share with them, I share with all of you, I share with the women who come to the studio. That hope, love, connection, and know that art, music, drumming, community can heal our souls. Thank you.